Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, Danny Segura, fresh off of covering Paul Silva. Love having Danny on. Farah Hanoun, she makes her glorious, long-awaited return to SBC. And, of course, goes from MMA Junkie Radio, a staple on the show. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. Let's get started. All right, here we go. Jake Paul defeated Anderson Silva via unanimous decision this past Saturday night. The 8-round affair also included a knockdown of the Spider in the final round. That led to scores of 78-73 by two judges, and the other judge had it 77-74. Paul closed strong, winning the last three rounds, 6, 7, and 8. And after the fight, he called out Nate Diaz and Canelo Alvarez. All right, Junkie team, react. Tell me what you felt the night of the fight as it was unfolding with the final result and all, and what you're thinking now, 36 hours later. All right, Danny, you're up first. Take it away.
Yeah, it was a lot to take in. It was a ton to take in, and it's a lot to unpack. First of all, let's start off by giving Jake Paul the credit that he deserves, because he does deserve credit. Going into the fight, if everybody saw sort of my tweets and what I was saying in various videos, I thought Anderson Silva was going to dance on Jake Paul. I thought Anderson Silva was going to mop the floor with Jake Paul. There was a huge difference in skill between Anderson Silva and the rest of the opponents that Jake Paul has had in the past. So for starters, let's be honest, I just thought he was going to get his ass kicked. So for one, we start getting a competitive fight. And then towards the end, we saw Paul picking it up and then get the knockdown and take home the win. I don't agree with some of the scorecards, but even though I don't agree, I still scored it for Jake Paul. I had it 76-75 with the knockdown. Obviously, that pushed Jake Paul to win. But going into the 8th round, I had it 4-3 Anderson Silva. So, dude, Jake Paul's got a lot better. He's gotten a lot better. He's very technically sound now. I wouldn't say he's an elite boxer, but he's kind of got a little bit of everything now. He's got a good defense. He can put together combinations. He's becoming a more complete fighter. And so that was very surprising. And now the world is his, because this was the type of performance he needed in order to get a bigger fight next. And obviously that bigger fight, I think, will be Nate Diaz. If you don't make the Nate Diaz fight, that has to be next, right? I know he called out Canelo Alvarez, and I know you laughed a little bit there, George. That's just silly. That's just silly. What this whole thing is about is Jake Paul versus MMA. And he just destroyed not destroyed, but he beat one of our heroes. He beat Anderson Silva. I mean, he's one of the greatest of all time, one of the best to ever do it, and somebody that's very beloved in this community. So anybody that wants to see Jake Paul get his ass kicked is not just they just want to see anybody beat him. They want to see an MMA guy beat him, because this is Jake Paul versus MMA. So whether it's GSP, whether it's Nate Diaz, a solid MMA representative needs to go there and beat him. I don't think a boxer like Rahman Jr., Tommy Fury, or even Canelo, let's pretend that that's even in the realm of possibilities. I don't think it'll scratch the itch for the MMA community if one of those guys were to get a victory over Jake Paul. I think it needs to be an MMA guy. This is what it's all about, MMA versus Jake Paul. And yeah, I mean, this whole thing just keeps getting crazier and crazier, right? Who thought Jake Paul, the YouTuber, would be sitting here 6-0 with a win over Anderson Silva and one of the most wanted people in the MMA community?
Damn, Danny, I was telling you to react to fight night, not react exactly how I was feeling. That's what I thought. Anderson's going to knock him out. He's going to do it. And yes, it is an MMA thing. We got to shove an MMA guy in there. I'm getting sick and tired of this guy. Holy cow, I need to settle down. Fada.
Tell him, George. No, tell him.
I'm serious. Like, he keeps picking on the older cats, although I really threw that out the window with Anderson Silva, right? I was like, older or not, he's Anderson. This guy floats, man. He's going to go in there and do the dance on this guy. I mean, he took out JCC Jr. while the other guy struggled with Woodley in the first fight, So I thought, I did the math. It just didn't work. Farah Hanoun, what do you think? And also, is Jake Paul good for boxing? I kept seeing that on Twitter all weekend.
I think he is, because he's drawing a lot. Like, if you're talking about casual fans, you're getting both worlds, right? You're getting the MMA world, you're getting the boxing world, and then you're getting like the social media world, which, if we're thinking about it, I mean, Jake Paul cares about the numbers. He talks about buys. He talks about getting MMA guys paid. So if he's going to go out and box a boxer who doesn't really have a name, but is good skill level, like a step up in competition from the MMA guys, how much interest is that going to garner overall if we're talking about the young crowd and the YouTube crowd that he brings? So like, I agree with Danny, and I like the MMA, I like Jake Paul versus MMA angle. And with Nate Diaz being there, obviously for Chris Avila, and the altercation and the storyline, like Nate Diaz knows how to sell a fight. He's a perfect dance partner. Nate Diaz is actually trained boxing as a discipline. It's predominantly what he does in fights. He's coming off of a win with the UFC. I know the fight can't happen right now. There's some like negotiation period that has to happen. But the reality is Nate Diaz is a guy that brings volume. He's got a great chin. You could even sell the whole thing that he's been knocked out by Josh Thompson. That's a head kick. But other than that, he hasn't really been knocked out cold before. That could be a challenge that Jake Paul takes upon his hands. The story's there. I mean, it's the perfect fight to make. And you know what? Jake Paul did surprise me as well against Anderson Silva. He was swinging and missing quite a bit in the beginning, but I was impressed with his cardio because he just kept pushing and he kept swinging big. And the fact that he was able to last 8 rounds and get the knockdown in round 8, I got to say I was impressed with that. And if anyone's going to push his cardio as well, it is a guy like Nate Diaz who brings a lot of volume. So I think that's the fight to make as well.
Yeah, and I do have to admit, I was impressed, man. Like, he does dig deep. I mean, when you think cardio issues are there, he does dig deep, turns around, knocks down the spider in round 8. Holy cow. Goes, how about you, man? Chime in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really about Jake earning our respect at this point, right? I think he's done that even to most of the haters. I started off as a person that didn't really know who he was. Then I didn't really like him, and now I actually do kind of get into his fights. I get into his persona a little bit. He has crossed over into mixed martial arts and picked some fights over there. So, I mean, he's got wins over 3 former champions, MMA champions. And this last one, it's not just an MMA champion, guys. It's one of the GOATs of mixed martial arts. That's got to carry something over. So Jake Paul has won me over. I totally respect this kid. As far as what's next, it really just depends on what it is you're looking for, right? Like, do you want to see Jake Paul get his ass kicked? Is that why you're tuning in? Are you tuning in because you actually enjoy the sport of boxing? Because it's just funny, MMA versus boxing? It depends what you're looking for. But I think a lot of people, if you talk to hardcore boxing fans, they want to see a boxer come out there. They want to see him box with a boxer, because what it's doing is it's creating a little bit of confusion amongst boxing fans. When people bring up boxing, they bring up Jake Paul, and hardcore boxing fans don't like that. So it really depends on the way that you look at this whole situation. But I got to imagine Nate Diaz is going to be next, guys.
Yeah, we'll tackle that in just a second because there's some stuff behind the scenes that people need to know. Even though we all know Nate Diaz is free of the UFC, he's not completely free. So we'll do that in a sec. But Danny, you were there, and I want to throw something back at you. All right. What about that bet? Is that just going to get forgotten about? Remember, there was this whole bet that they made, and if Anderson lost, Anderson was going to join Jake Paul, and they're going to fight on behalf of fighters, pay mostly, the way they're treated. What do you think, man? Is that just like for headlines, or do you really see a passion for this guy when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of whatever the noise that you made. Yeah, man. I mean, I can't imagine Anderson Silva putting his money and effort into making an association or some sort of union effort for fighters, especially for fighters in the UFC. And he kind of backpedaled as well. Like during that, he was like, no, it's not just UFC. It's just MMA fighters because I want to help MMA fighters. And I do believe Anderson Silva's heart is to do that. With Jake Paul, I don't really know exactly if he's just doing it for the promo or he's actually into it. But I think generally, like, everyone wants to see fighters get paid more and treated better. But when it comes to the practice, and I don't blame anyone for already outside of the game, not having much skin in the game to want to go and do it. When it comes to the actual practice of it, you're talking about putting lawyers together. You're talking about putting tons of money together. I mean, it's a huge effort. You might as well get a full-time job with that. And even then, you don't have like an excellent shot at succeeding, right? We know that these things have come and gone through in the past, and there's a reason why they go away, right? All these associations that have been made. It is very, very difficult to put something together. So I think Anderson Silva is very much pro fighter. I think he's very much has a fighter interest at best. I do believe that he will be sort of champion of some sort of organization and kind of shine light on it and advocate for fighters. But when it comes to putting down money, starting an organization from scratch, I don't necessarily see that. So if that's what Jake Paul ends up doing with his people, which I doubt, I believe Anderson Silva will honor his side of of the bet, and then, you know, kind of champion it and just be some sort of representative. But as far as them together colliding and putting some sort of legal thing together, I don't see it happening. So we'll see. Again, it's hard to gauge exactly how Jake Paul views MMA, because he's currently making a ton of money off the MMA community. Really, this is people that are watching this are not watching for the sweet science, for the pure boxing. Look, if you want to watch some good high-level boxing, you watch anything but Jake Paul. And again, I just gave props to Jake Paul a few minutes ago. Sure, he's a decent boxer, but that's as good as it gets. He's not a world-class fighter. If you want to see the best boxing technique out there, you do not watch this fight. You watch this fight because it's the two popular kids in school fighting, per se. It might not be the toughest kids, but they're the two popular kids. And I think that has a lot of interest in people, especially the social media culture that Farrah was talking about. I'm telling you, I was at the event and you couldn't tell who was famous, who wasn't, because everybody was wearing all flashy things. Everybody kind of looked like Sean O'Malley. It was crazy. But anyways, yeah, I don't even know where I was going. But yes, as far as the whole union thing, I don't see it happening, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it was Halloween weekend. Maybe they were all dressed up as each other or something. I don't know. And happy Halloween to everybody as we film this live, SBC Live, every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's go to topic 2 here. Let's put the silliness of the Alvarez call out. Sorry, I got to chuckle, man. We'll put it to the side and let's discuss the Diaz call out. The fight has been talked about now for over a year. It can happen, right? But not right away, because even though he's out of the UFC, there's still an exclusive negotiating and matching period first that he has to clear. But I do want to know, are you in for Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz at all? Scale of 1 to 10, all right? 10 being I'm in, 1 being like, nah, right? How do you think this fight goes over with the public? You know, these are pretty big names. What do you guys think, starting off with Fada?
I'd probably say 7 out of 10. I'm not against it. I think because at the end of the day, he impressed us against Anderson Silva and he surpassed our expectations. But we're not talking about, okay, he's ready for Canelo Alvarez. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, it's like he had a competitive fight with Anderson. I know I've seen a lot of comments with people going like, Anderson's 47, he's past his prime. Of course, he doesn't have the reaction time that he did in his prime run in the UFC. We saw how his last few MMA fights have gone. So he's not that Anderson. It's still impressive regardless, especially that Anderson has that win over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So I think, you know, Jake Paul, that's the kind of level of competition in terms of the MMA guys who could box that I want to see. He started out with Askren, who isn't really a striker. Woodley, who's got one-punch knockout power, but tends to not throw too much volume. And then Anderson Silva, obviously a guy who's very skilled and has very good, like, evasive defensive techniques. He was able to knock him down. I think Diaz is just kind of like skill-wise, a good test for him. He does have a great chin. He has great cardio. He'll bring the volume. And I think the storyline is there. And I know that's important for Jake as well to sell the fight. In terms of a guy like Tommy Fury, yeah, I could see that as a potential next opponent, but that fight fell through. And I don't think the excitement level, if it was even there at a super high level, I don't think it's there right now at a high level. I think with Diaz being there, kind of like the altercation, everything, just the promotion of the fight, I think if Diaz does end up leaving the UFC, I think that's the fight to make. So yeah, I mean, as we get closer, I'm sure they'll do a very good job of building the fight up. They're both good at that. But I just think, like, skill level and where Jake Paul is at right now, I think Diaz is a logical next step.
All right, Fada gives it a 7. That sounds about right. But I'll tell you what, Sky V, L Daddy in the chat, he's not feeling it at all. He's wondering why we're even discussing this. He says the Pauls are a joke and they're making a mockery of retirees. Yeah, I guess in a way, yeah, but we discuss it because it's popping, man. It's popping. What do you want us to talk about? Arnold Allen and Calvin Kattar? Did you not see the way that ended?
But if I could just jump in, I want to say, like, Diaz, like, the way he exited the UFC, that win over Tony Ferguson, he's had his big fights. We never saw that trilogy with McGregor materializing. I think it's a good time for Diaz as well at that point in his career. He's not a title contender or anything like that. That's another thing I just want to throw out there.
Yeah, and he's not getting any younger, too. He's upper 30s as well. So after that negotiation period or whatever, it has to happen, you know, and Paul's a young cat. He's got all kinds of time. Goes 1 to 10?
I'm a solid 5 in the looks department and my excitement for this fight, guys. I don't see what the big deal is here. What I think is happening is I think Jake Paul is kind of a victim of his own success here, okay? He's taking out former champions. For me, to fight Nate Diaz, that almost feels like a step down, really, when you think about it. Think about the people he took out. Like Anderson Silva's been training pure boxing for about 2 years now. All right. You want a guy like Nate Diaz to come in who, yeah, he trains this, but it's not something he's engulfed himself in. Jake Paul's engulfed in boxing, man. It's all he's doing. So this fight to me doesn't really get my appetite going that much. Like Anderson Silva was the bigger guy. He had the training. Like I really thought he should have got this guy. And I thought it was a little bit of an off night for Anderson. But even then, he should have still beat Jake Paul, but he didn't. You look at Nate Diaz, and I'm going to tell you something. What really affected my excitement for this fight was the way he looked against Tony Ferguson. It didn't look like he took it very serious at all. He just kind of showed up, and luckily Tony Ferguson wasn't in that good of a shape, and he won, and you got to give him his props for that, but he didn't look great. He didn't look like the old Nate Diaz. So really, now you're going to pull him over into boxing where people are notorious for just showing up and collecting a check. I don't want to see that. I want to see the old Nate Diaz. I want to see him fired up. I want to see him in the gym. I want to see him really, really look like he wants this fight, because that last performance it left me kind of wondering, like, does this kid is he just about making money, or does he really want to be one of the greatest in combat sports? And Jake Paul's no joke, man. Speed kills in boxing, and he's got that speed advantage, movement, footwork, all that. Trust me, you're not going to have your jiu-jitsu to fall back on here. You have to box. I think Jake Paul just kind of dances around, hits him here and there, and wins a decision.
All right, good stuff from Goes. Goes, by the way, I got a text from Mom. She says you're a solid 6, not a 5.
Thanks, Mom.
Pick yourself up, mijo, she said. Also in the chat, Marcus Bell, Jake Paul fights. It reminds him of a game called Let's Get Ready to Rumble. Okay. Danny Segura, how about you, man? 1 to 10. You were in the arena, and I know you heard about the fisticuffs in the back. Does this thing have some buzz?
Yeah, 100%. I disagree completely with Ghost here. Look, is Jake Paul my cup of tea? Is that something that I'm interested as far as entertainment value? No, not really. I'd rather watch high-level MMA. That's my thing. But Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz, that is absolutely the fight to make. And I'll say, as far as interest, 10 out of 10. I mean, Nate Diaz, he's arguably the biggest star of the sport. I mean, it's probably him and Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor maybe slightly bigger, I would say, but certainly in that level. This is the next logical step. Again, I don't want to see him against the boxer. We know we don't need proof. We know that Jake Paul is not a high-level boxer. And, like, again, Tommy Fury, is there a lot of buzz for that? Who's Tommy Fury? I know he was in some show, Love Island or whatever. I know he's Tyson Fury's half-brother, but there's really not a whole lot of buzz. Same thing with Rockman Jr. We saw a lead up to that. There was no buzz at all. It's really back to what I said. It's the popular kids. It's popular kid versus popular kid. We're not looking at the two toughest, the two best kids going at it in school. We're looking at the two with the biggest names. And in order to do that, usually name is correlated with skill, right? Like the better you are, usually the more famous you are, right? That's why Canelo's probably the pound for pound right now, Tyson Fury, etc. So you're not going to pick a big name in the boxing world because simply you're just going to be out of your depth as far as the boxing skill side. But you can do that with MMA because these MMA fighters are not well-versed in boxing, obviously, because they train all these other disciplines. So 100% the Nate Diaz is the fight to make. It's a competitive fight. Heck, I might even have Jake Paul as a slight favorite going into it. And again, two huge names, huge payday for Nate Diaz. I don't think Jake Paul, I don't think Nate Diaz likes Jake Paul a ton. I was there when we were at the ceremonial weigh-ins, and Nate Diaz was there for Chris Avila, and he was walking out in front of the stage to kind of go around, I don't know for what, but the whole ceremony hadn't really started, and he sees Jake Paul on the screen and just flicks him off. And, you know, the crowd at the arena went wild. I think there's 100% interest in this fight. It's a competitive bout. I believe the MMA fans are hungry and want to see Jake Paul get his ass kicked by an MMA legend. And Nate Diaz is one of the most beloved figures. So I think people would love to watch Jake Paul get his ass kicked by Nate Diaz.
Jake Paul and Nate Diaz right now have champagne, and they're toasting to Danny Segura right now. They're going, "We got him. We got him. These are the guys how we're going to get these
They can hire me.
This will not be a competitive fight. It won't be a competitive fight. I'm telling you guys. They're looking at dollar signs. Nate Diaz is going to show up. He's going to train like a couple weeks. He's going to think that he could just flip. You can't even flip him off. He's got gloves on. He can't flip him off. Like that. What's going to happen in this fight? Jake Paul's going to.
You think Jake Paul runs over Nate Diaz?
I think he runs over. Not runs over him. I think he outclasses him.
See, I think you might out youth him in the sense that he is bigger, he does have more power, but in terms of skill, they'll be pretty even. But remember, Nate Diaz is also a tough dude. If it comes down to digging deep, there's fewer people. I mean, it's hard to find somebody on this planet that can dig deeper than Nate Diaz, and he might be up in age, but that guy can dig deep. And also, I don't think he wants to get his ass kicked by Jake Paul. I think there will be some sort of fire in him. When he was preparing for Hamzat, it was like, dude, I didn't even train. He said that in the lead up for this. I really do think he'll get up for it. So I don't know, man. We'll see. But I do think that fight's going to happen 100%.
All right. Now, you brought up the odds. We have them. The opening odds are Jake Paul minus 260, Nate Diaz plus 200. So real quick, before I move on to topic 3, what's your early lean? Make it quick, guys. We'll start off with Fada.
I get why he's the favorite. He's just coming off of that win over Anderson Silva, so I get why. I don't know. It's tough. I don't know. I'm really on the fence. I haven't even thought about it, but I'd say I'm gonna go with Diaz. Actually, just slightly leaning towards Diaz.
All right, goes. Oh, well, I think you made it clear. Paul and Danny probably Diaz.
I'll go Paul as the favorite, but slightly. I don't agree with the odds, but that's probably just to get people to bet on Diaz, as the underdog. But yeah, slight favorite, Jake Paul.
Yeah, I think I might start being a believer of Paul. And yeah, Diaz. A lot has to do with Diaz's last performance. Oh man, against Ferguson, it was a fun fight to watch, but it didn't seem the high level Nate Diaz I'm used to watching. All right. So Anderson Silva wasn't the only MMA legend in the Desert Diamond Arena this past Saturday night. Former UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre, who worked the analyst desk, he had some interesting things to say to our Danny Segura about his new free agent status. Quote, I could do something. No, I'm just kidding. I could do something, but it needs to be something well organized and maybe something where the risks of injury are at a minimum. Not something that's too crazy because my days of competing are over. If I do it, I will do it well and train my ass off. You never say never, but it needs to be in the right timing. We'll see. All right, that's the end of the quote. Guys, got to tell you, he doesn't seem to me to be too fired up about competing unless it's a sweetheart of a deal, if you know what I mean. How about y'all? Give me a realistic, feasible fight for him that we can all buy into and get excited about. Goes, get the party started.
Well, you have to read into all the things that he's talking about, right? He wants a decent name, probably a really good payout, but at the same time, he doesn't want to risk too much, right? There's not too many of those fighters out there. Seeing that he's a free agent, then that pretty much rules out everybody in the UFC, right? Otherwise, you would have done that already. So it rules out all of their fighters. He's not the GSP of old. He's still GSP, though. He's still jumping in the ice baths. He's still working out, but that doesn't mean we need to throw him in against the killer. So here's what I suggest. We had Ben Askren in our studio the other day, and Ben said, surprisingly, that hip has been holding up a lot better than he thought. Why not match him up against a guy like Ben Askren? All right, you got one guy who has one of the best wrestling for MMA skill sets versus one of the best wrestlers of all time. Put him and Ben Askren in there. I know Ben has ties to one championship, Bellator, but I think it would be kind of a competitive matchup. I don't know that GSP really has to worry about getting hurt too bad, right? Ben's hands aren't the best in the world, and I think they would both get up for it because it's a fight that had been talked about years before. It's something that it was one of the reasons why Ben Askren wanted to go to the UFC the first time. So I think that's kind of like a fair matchup where neither guy would probably get hurt too bad.
I just don't know that that's a big fight, Goes. That's hardcores. Yeah, we're all in, but I don't know.
Is that about boxing?
It's not a big stage.
MMA, because the big, if you want a big fight, you're gonna have to risk something, and he's not ready to risk anything, right? He doesn't want to get hurt. He doesn't want to get banged up. I mean, obviously the big one out there is Anderson Silva, but dude, that you're gonna get hurt if you go out there and fight that guy.
Danny, how about
I don't think there's any appetite for a Ben Askren fight after what we saw against Jake Paul. And I mean, look, I don't want to call Ben Askren a liar, but I know a paycheck would be nice. I know he just took out his book, is probably doing quite well, but I don't have much faith on Ben Askren, and I mean it with all the respect, Ben. But I mean, he said he was in shape for that Jake Paul fight. We saw the way he stepped on the scale. I don't have any interest, to be honest. I don't know how fans feel, but I don't know. I don't know if there's much interest with that with GSP versus Ben Askren. I guess it goes, if you had to pitch it on a sales pitch, what would it be? Because these two were some of the best weights around in their time. But what would it be? Because to me, this is very surprising.
It's former champions fighting against each other. It's a fight that we all wanted to see in the past, right?
To be clear, you guys mean MMA, right, Goes?
Yeah, in MMA, we don't want him to box. I mean,
Ben
Askren didn't look great, but he didn't look great in boxing, right?
I don't think GSP comes out for an MMA fight because the pay just won't be there. The only thing I can think about is, maybe capturing another world title, but I don't think Bellator or One Championship is going to say, we'll put it at stake and put our division on hold just because you're back in a super fight against Ben Askren. So, man, I'm just thinking outside the box. Maybe New Year's Eve, Rizin Bellator. This is the cherry on top. These two former champs, we pay them a lot of money. We give them that briefcase with a bunch of cash in it, like the old Pride days. But I think the bigger money is in boxing. But Danny, you want to finish up, man? How about you? Do you have a realistic and possible, fight for GSP?
I would say this: if I know that there's not a huge appetite in this industry, like this industry isn't as big as the boxing one or the MMA, but in a wrestling match, Ben Askren versus GSP, say you put that Polaris or any of these grappling events, that could be interesting. Obviously, if Ben Askren is healthy and his hip is good, that could be interesting because we know that the Funk Master there, Funky Ben is an amazing wrestler, and we know that GSP, part of why he was so successful was the wrestling. So that could be maybe interesting, but that would be like a small little thing. As far as like big fights, talking to George, I didn't get the sense that he would be down to fight Jake Paul. I gave him a bunch of opportunities to kind of be like, call him out. I'm like, hey, do you want this? What do you think of this fight? This and that. I think that he's more interested in the challenges. He doesn't care what it sells on pay-per-view. He doesn't care. He doesn't really care about this whole social media thing. I think for him is, one, not tarnishing his legacy. I think he's really protecting that. And two, getting a respectable and legitimate name. I think that's what he was interested in the Oscar de la Hoya boxing match, because, Oscar de la Hoya, obviously he's a legend in the game, and that could be an interesting challenge for him. And it's a fairly manageable task given that he's, older. So I think something like that will probably entice George. But to be honest, if I had to bet on it, I didn't see him too committed to come back.
That's kind of what I was feeling too. He was just kind of like giving you an answer, but definitely not telling you, hey, pass my number along to all these promoters. How about you, Fada? Can you think of anything?
I don't want to see him fight, period. I think him walking out with that win over Michael Bisping, that layoff, the way the fight went, and just him becoming a two-weight division champion was perfect. I mean, it's a perfect ending. So I don't want to see him fight. If he's going to compete at any capacity, maybe a grappling match with Khabib, I think that will garner a lot of interest from the fans. I don't know whether they do it under Eagle FC or Polaris or whatever it may be, but I think that's definitely going to get a lot of people to watch. You can get hurt in grappling, of course. I mean, we remember Cub Swanson. That was very unfortunate because he's still an active MMA fighter. But at the end of the day, it's not head trauma. It's not concussions. It's not stuff like that. So I think if I'm going to see GSP compete at any type of capacity, I'd say like a grappling match against Khabib. I think that would definitely garner a lot of interest amongst the diehards, 100%. But if promoted correctly, just in general as well.
I don't want to see him box at all, guys. Like the whole purpose of him coming back is you want to relive some of that greatness, right? And really, when it came to striking, that wasn't his greatness, right? We don't remember him in his hands. Like, he did what he had to do to win certain fights, and he used it. But I want to see some of like Farah said, if it's going to happen, I'm okay with MMA. I'm okay with grappling, but boxing, I'm not too interested in. But honestly, I don't want to see GSP come back at all.
Yeah, in that quote to Danny, I remember him talking about low risk, and to me, I was thinking brain trauma, and associated with that is obviously boxing. Not to say that MMA isn't going to have some of that as well, but I was seeing something along the lines of probably grappling or wrestling, and I like the.
He did accept a fight with Oscar De La Hoya not that long ago, so let's keep that in mind.
Money talks.
So maybe GSP's kind of playing hard to get to, like, hey, look, I'm taking a big risk here for all potential suitors, and he doesn't want to seem too hungry for a return. That maybe that could be part of negotiations. I don't know if I'm looking too much into it.
All right, we move on. ATT head coach Mike Brown, in an interview with our Mike Bond from MMA Junkie, he discussed some of his athletes' timelines for future competition. One in particular that I want to talk about is the BMF himself, Jorge Masvidal. Coach Brown sees some big fights ahead. Here were his thoughts. The quote here is something exciting, something big, something people get excited about. And specifically, guys, that was the end of the quote. Specifically, he mentioned the names Conor McGregor, Leon Edwards. Brown said a fight with either one of those guys would give us, quote, one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time, end quote. Well, he ain't lying. I'll give him that. None of them fights would suck. But are they realistic right now? Danny, it's back on you, dog.
I guess they're all realistic. I would say that Leon Edwards is realistic, even though I don't like it, to be quite honest. I think it's realistic because, you know, the whole three-piece and the soda, and also Leon Edwards would love a big fight, right? Because now he's a champion, and now he's able to make pay-per-view points. And Jorge Masvidal is one of the biggest fights he could possibly get. Would it be bigger than the trilogy with Kamaru Usman? I don't know, but I think that's certainly debatable. And obviously, we know for obvious reasons why Jorge Masvidal would want to fight Leon Edwards. So I guess they're all realistic, but I hate seeing Jorge Masvidal in a title fight right now. And I love George, all the respect to Jorge, but he just doesn't deserve it. And there's contenders that do, tons of them. So I want to see, you know, deserving contenders get their shot. Now, Jorge Masvidal is able to get a few wins, and I don't think he needs to, you know, destroy the entire division in order to get back there. And we can see maybe that three-piece in the soda come full circle. Okay, sure. But until then, he needs to fight. He needs to fight. And I do agree with Mike Brown that why not put him in exciting fights? Because I don't want to see him against top contenders right now, because that's not what he is. Now, if he's able to pick up some steam and then maybe we can put him in top contender fights down the line, okay. But for now, just make fun fights with him. He's a star. He's an exciting fighter, because let's not forget, if the fight is standing, he is very, very exciting. He's got very, very good boxing. He's a huge name. Put him against Conor McGregor. Put him against these type of names. So I'm all for the Conor McGregor, especially now that Nate Diaz is on the verge of becoming a free agent, and that fight for Conor McGregor doesn't seem to be available in the immediate future. I think that the most logical step has to be Jorge Masvidal. So book Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal. I'm all in. Hey, and in Miami too. Let's not forget, Conor has the key of Miami given by the mayor. So maybe they can battle for it. You know, instead of the BMF, they can fight for the city. I don't know.
I mean, they can fight over that phone that he slapped out of that guy's hand too at the hotel. Fada,
I think it's probably gone.
Before you answer here, I just thought of something. All right, you know this three-piece in a soda. It's got to happen. I say it all the time, and I believe in it. But I just thought, man, the UFC couldn't even make McGregor and Diaz, that trilogy, happen. So if they can't even make that, probably the highest yielding fight in terms of revenue. If they can't make that fight happen, why would they have any interest in three-piece and a soda?
Well, I think because when you – no, go for it, Danny.
No, I'll just add real quick. Remember when Dan Henderson fought Michael Bisping? He was ranked number 13. What is Jorge Masvidal ranked right now? I think he might be even higher than 13. And that was kind of a fight for Michael Bisping, you know, a revenge in his home country. I feel like maybe that can have that treatment for Leon, a big fight, cash out on Jorge. I don't know. Make Leon a bigger star.
Yeah, I was going to say, because at the end of the day, with Conor and Nate, they're not exactly the easiest to negotiate with when it comes to money. I think with Leon, of course, if he did want the fight and he was down for it, I know Jorge is, there is going to be some negotiations, but I just don't think it's going to be as hard to make if both parties are 100% convinced. I think Leon was feeling it in the moment. His coach went on and said after that, no, he doesn't deserve it, back of the line, blah, blah, blah. But with Jorge Masvidal, I think a fight with Gilbert Burns is risky, because you lose to Gilbert Burns, it really pushes you behind. But I think with Masvidal, a win period is enough, in my opinion, for him to get a shot at Leon. Now, of course, it's risky because you could lose that fight, because Leon could lose to Kamaru Usman, but you can still make that fight anyway without the title on the line, right? So I think with Jorge Masvidal, because he's on a 3-fight losing skid against really tough guys, twice to Kamaru and once to Colby Covington, stylistically weren't the most favorable matchups. Gilbert Burns is a little bit risky, and we've seen Burns fight smart before. Look at the way he fought Wonder Boy. So Burns has the skill set to kind of make it not the most entertaining fight in the world, although he's got great striking. You don't want to do that to Jorge Masvidal. A 4th loss in a bit of a lackluster fight is really going to kill his momentum. So I think for Jorge Masvidal, if you're going to give him a massive fight like Conor McGregor, I'm all for it. But give him a fight where I feel like just one win is enough for him to fight those big names, whether Leon is champion or not. I think he just needs one win, period, no matter who it's against. And we can maybe even give him a title shot if Leon wants it and he's still champ.
Guys, I got another crazy thought. What about GSP comes back and he fights Masvidal for the BMF?
That is a crazy
I don't know.
thought.
I don't know. I mean, I think he's waited all this time. I don't know if he wants to fight in the UFC again.
I know it's Halloween, but that full moon, I don't see it just yet, George. That was tough.
All right. How about you, Goes? You got something here? What are you thinking, man?
I love the Conor McGregor matchup. The only problem is I don't know how realistic it is, because one thing that Jorge Masvidal, I mean, the thing that drives that kid is money, right? And he's no spring chicken. And he'd have to wait for Conor and the USADA pool and all that. By the time that were to ever happen, it's going to be a long layoff for Jorge Masvidal. And I don't know that he wants that. Although that fight is fireworks written all over it. I think it makes sense. I think it would be fun stylistically. But that's kind of where I would lean. Like Farah said, though, that does make sense. Like, I think the UFC has started to warm up to Jorge Masvidal. He makes them a lot of money. When this guy fights pay-per-views, guys, these pay-per-views are high. There's a lot of interest. So you want to put him in these type of fights. I don't know that he has to go back and win a couple. Like Farah said, I think he only really needs to win one and then hope that the right scenario falls into the place where he can do the whole 3-piece in a soda and do that one actually in the cage. And hopefully not a steakhouse or something like that, right? We want his next fight to be in the cage. The Conor McGregor fight is the most appetizing, but he's going to have to wait for that. But the UFC can easily make that work for Jorge Masvidal. You know what I mean? So that's the one that I would be leaning towards.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll see him in 2023. It's been long enough. We got to move on. All right, listen up. How does an MMA card on New Year's Eve at the Saitama Super Arena in Japan sound? Does it bring back any memories? For me, it does. Rizin and Bellator. Rizin 40, and it's going to feature top fighters from each promotion. This includes fighters ranked in the USA Today Sports and MMA Junkie rankings, such as Pitbull Frady, AJ McKee, Juan Archuleta, Kyoji Horiguchi. They will each square off against some of the Rizin All-Stars. Again, it's BMMA against Rizin, Bellator MMA against Rizin. And again, Bellator's bringing some really, really big guns to face off against the Rizin All-Stars. What did you guys think of this announcement? Kind of caught me out of left field, and I'm pretty jacked about it. Fada, we're all ears. Go.
I like it. I think it's fun. It's perhaps not the matchups I would have necessarily expected, but at the end of the day, I like the concept. It's fun. If you're a little bit boring like me and don't go crazy on New Year's Eve, I'm all for it to have some fights to watch. They put forward their biggest names, champions. I know their titles are not on the line, but Rizin have put up some of their champions as well, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's weird to see Pitbull and McKee on the same card, not fighting each other again, but Bellator versus Rizin here. But I think it's going to be a fun night of fights. I actually, although Horiguchi's up 2-0 against Hiromasa, that's actually weirdly the most fight I'm excited for. I think I really liked how Hiromasa looked against Kaya Sakura. I thought that was he won the Grand Prix. He looked really good, and I know for him there's a lot of motivation because he's down 2-0. But I think that's a fun fight to watch. I think all the fights are going to be fun. AJ McKee and Roberto Souza. I don't know. I think it's going to be a fun night of fights. There aren't necessarily any stakes. I know the promotions going head to head. There are stakes there, but I don't think it really affects any of these fighters too crazy in their careers. Maybe AJ McKee can't afford another loss just because he was the untouchable guy that may potentially go to UFC later on. So maybe individually in that sense, but not in terms of rankings and all that stuff. So I think it's just going to be a fun night of fights.
Get the broom out. I think it's going to be a sweep. But all right, we'll see. Maybe Rizin can surprise me and shut my pie hole up. Sky VL Daddy in the chat room says, nice that Bellator Rizin is that card is stacked much better than their previous cross promotions. Goes, you're next, man. What did you think of this announcement?
Well, we're always asking for promotions to do things like this, right? It's Bellator's best against Rizin's best. I applaud them for trying to make this happen. But when you put things in front of me like this, the first question I'm always going to ask you is, what's the point of the fight, right? What does it prove? I think this is just kind of like a fun night, and we have to live with that. But really, I'm tuning in to watch the Bellator fighters here, guys. I mean, there's no way around it. They are the A side in this. It's not like we've done a lot of spinning back click episodes in the past. We've never had the topic of what would happen if Bellator were to face Rizin, right? It's kind of like one of them when you're at a restaurant, a fancy restaurant, and they bring you that complimentary dessert. You didn't ask for it. They put it in front of you, and if you didn't eat it, your night wouldn't change, but you don't really send it back, right? I'm not going to send this back. I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is. But really, I'm tuning in here to see the Bellator fighters.
All right. How about you, Danny? What do you think, man? How does this thing go down? Were you excited about the announcement?
Yeah, I'm excited about the announcement. I love this fight that we're seeing right now on the video. Roberto Souza versus Adrian McKee. I think it's a fantastic fight. I love crossover. I think it's fun to see representatives of promotions go to other promotions and battle it out. We saw that with some UFC fighters back in the day at Pride. Probably the most recent version of that we saw was Kayla Harrison competing under the Invicta banner. And we know that mixed martial arts is an individualistic sport. And these type of fights, cross-promotion fights, make you feel like a team sport because they're out there representing a promotion, right? Like Kayla Harrison was out there representing the PFL. It was PFL versus Invicta. In this sense, it's going to be Rizin, obviously, against Bellator. So I do like that because now there's sort of a team sports feel, which we rarely get in this sport that is very, very individualistic. So I'm all for it. I do agree with you, George, that, you know, it's just a fun night. I think that's what it is. Obviously, you got some champ versus champ fights. But I think it's interesting. I'm all for these. I wouldn't want them all the time, but every now and then in a special occasion, New Year's Eve in this case, I think this is awesome. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, Bellator is bringing some killers. Those four specifically, especially Pitbull and AJ, are very special fighters. And so is Kyoji Horiguchi. I've always said, I feel like his stats line up as the best Japanese fighter I've ever seen. Not the most popular, I get it. Lots of love for Sakuraba and some of the others, but Kyoji Horiguchi has been a stud. All right, we move on here. Speaking of the rankings, did you guys see all the chatter last week about the UFC rankings, specifically the bantamweight division, post UFC 280? Apparently, Sean O'Malley jumped to number 1 after his win over former UFC bantamweight champion Petr Yan. In the USA Today Sports and MMA Junkie rankings, however, Sean O'Malley is number 4. Just want to be transparent. Guys, fair or foul? What did you think of that big jump up? Goes, we're coming back at you.
That's a big foul if you ask me. I mean, look, the guy he beat, I feel like is the clear number 1, and he beat him. So you would think, okay, maybe he takes his spot, but that's not really how rankings work, guys. This wasn't a gradual climb the way it's supposed to be. This was more like a triple jump, what you're used to seeing in the Olympics. It was a leapfrog, and he leapfrogged over a guy, Marlon Chito Vera, who has a win over him. And isn't that the whole point of all this, guys, is we're trying to figure out, well, they can't all fight each other, so we rank them. We try and figure out, well, what would happen if this guy fought that guy? Well, we have evidence of that right here. You can't have him above that guy. If you're going to do that, then you have to have a lot of different wins in between to make that make sense. Rankings tell a story, and in this story, it doesn't really make much sense for him to jump that many spots up to the front. I like what we have here at USA Today Sports, our rankings. That makes a little bit more sense. Have him around that 4 to 5 range. But 1 is just that's insane.
Yeah, and at the same time, I would even argue that to the fighter that makes the jump, you wouldn't want someone to do that to you if you beat them in the recent past. 36 months usually is a nice little window of the most recent activity. Sometimes we go back a little bit further, but those fights have to mean something. So just starting with Chito Vera, and there's also others that have just longer win streaks. But anyway, don't get me started on this because I have something to do with our USA Today Sports MMA Junkie rankings. I can go on this topic forever. Next up is Danny. How about you, man? What do you think?
Yeah, this was extremely puzzling. I think this is one of the first times that we actually see a fighter take over the ranking of someone. Usually, and this is a complaint that a lot of fighters have, is like, yo, I beat number 2. How am I not number 2, right? Like, I'm supposed to take their spot. But that was pretty much the case here, right? And he went from number 11 to number 1, which is very, very crazy, jumping 10 spots. And maybe if the division was like super weak, as we've seen in some of the weight classes, all right. But we're talking about 135 pounds. We're talking about bantamweight, who's absolutely stacked and easily the most competitive, the best division today in the UFC and just mixed martial arts, period. So this was very weird. I think you guys in the USA Today and MMA Junkie rankings nailed it right on the head. I do believe if you beat the number one contender, heck, you got to enter the top 5 and be a title contender because that's what the top is. But number one, seriously, and I think you guys made a great point by bringing up Chito. That guy beat Sean O'Malley, and he's on a crazy win streak. I think he's way more deserving, at least on a sports and merit base. This was very troubling to see because, I mean, you know, we got to call it how it is. Let's also not forget that Sean O'Malley is maybe the biggest star in the division. We know that the UFC is trying to push them. So, again, it's just a weird situation, right?
Yeah, I'm not feeling it, man. All right, how about you, Fada? What did you think? Fair or foul?
Foul to Danny, but doesn't seem like for the rest of the division, because if you look at Sandhagen's comments, you look at Tito Vera, they're like, yeah, he can get the next title shot. Why? Because cha-ching, if O'Malley's ranked above you, for you to get to that title, you're going to have to fight him, and you get to fight, like Danny said, arguably the biggest star in the division, win-win situation. So the rest of the division doesn't seem to be so mad. We can, and I get it, because you've got other guys that are on winning streaks that have beaten more notable names. Not more notable names than Peter Yan, sorry, more notable names overall. But at the end of the day, it seems like the rest of the division isn't too mad, because for them, it's a win-win situation. If O'Malley's ranked above them, now they see the value in fighting him in both ways. Money-wise, name-wise, value-wise, sales, whatever you want to call it. And he's ranked above them, so it's going to move them one step closer in the division. So whether Cejudo gets it against Aljamain Sterling, now everyone's going to want O'Malley. Why? He's the number one guy rankings wise, and he's got the name value. So I think why the rest of the division isn't too mad, because it's a win-win situation now.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys know how I feel. Foul for me on that one. I just wasn't feeling it all the way to number one. It's a body of work. You know, you don't just fight that one fight. It's a body of work. And, you know, some of the other ones have just been banging for a while, and they've been winning a little bit longer as well. Mm-hmm. So you can't just overreact either. What does help, though, is what I call a round robin. Had Chito lost to someone that O'Malley had beaten, well, now you have a round robin, and then you kind of go to the more recent play, or at least the more the bigger statement, like a finish over 2 decisions or something like that. But yeah, get it together, UFC rankings panel. All right, we have just enough time to squeeze in a couple others, and that's what I love about the extended format here at SBC Spinning Back Click Live, Mondays, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Tell your friends. Here we go. We got a little bit of overtime. These are some additionals. Paddy Pimblett, guys and gal, he was booked versus Jared Gordon for UFC 282. It's taking place here in Las Vegas in December. Is this a good next step for him? Or is it too risky, too easy, just right? Tell me, what do you think? Goes ahead. Haven't heard from you. Go ahead.
I mean, I think it's just about right. Jared Gordon is a tough fighter. You can't be in the UFC that long and not be a difficult outing. And that's probably going to be right about the sweet spot, I think, for Paddy Pimblett. But, you know, the fans, they want to see him fight bigger names, and I understand that. Jared Gordon is a decent fighter, but I don't know that his name is up to level. But it's going to be a tough fight. It's going to be just like his last fight. You know, like I think we all kind of felt that one was somewhat in the right spot. I feel like Jared Gordon is somewhat in the right spot. But if Paddy Pimblett can get through him easily, I think we're going to really ask for a bigger jump in this next fight.
Danny, too easy, too risky? What do you think?
I think it's perfect. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the Paddy Pimblett show. It doesn't matter who he fights. And we do not want to sort of thrust him, or at least the UFC doesn't want to thrust him up in the rankings, because he's still a very incomplete fighter for now. I think Jared Gordon is a veteran. He's a good name to have on your resume. I mean, he's a very difficult guy to beat. He's very solid, very experienced. And at the same time, you know, he is an escalation as far as skills and ability from his previous opponents. So I do think it's a step up to see how Paddy Pimblett is evolving. I do think this fight makes perfect sense, and the matchmakers nailed it in this one.
Yeah, perfectly said. I think Jared Gordon has some value. You got to respect that. Fada, what did you think? Did you like this? Because remember, these are sometimes the matchups where the matchmakers make their money, earn their money. Sean Shelby, McMaynard, right? You got a superstar who you got to kind of coddle a little bit.
No, I love it. And I think because we see a similar thing to Sean O'Malley when he started out his career, people were complaining a little bit. All of a sudden he fights Peter Yan, and now he's the number 1 ranked bantamweight. So I think with Paddy Pimblett, this is perfect. I think Jared Gordon, his UFC experience as well, He's got some solid wins on his resume. He has a win over his teammate, Chris Fishgold. So I think there's a story there. I caught him in Abu Dhabi right after the fight announcement, and he was talking about advocating for mental health, not really looking to go down the trash talking route. But that seemed, I mean, Pimblett's post-fight speech at UFC London, I was there, and just the buzz from the crowd and just the reaction, even outside of MMA, it got a lot of traction. So I think with a guy like Paddy, doesn't need to be the trash talking route to get people to watch. People are going to watch this guy regardless. But in terms of the fight itself, Jared Gordon's a good grappler as well. And that's where Paddy Pimblett has been able to excel a lot. We saw that knockout against Vendramini, but people kind of criticized him. Bisping did as well, talking about having his chin up and whatnot. So here, to rely on his grappling, he's going, if we see a grappling fight, he's going against a very solid grappler, just a well-rounded veteran in Jared Gordon. And I think it's a good step up. And like Danny said, if he can get a definitive win and a finish, because he's been finishing fights, he can finish him. That's when maybe you can talk about the jump up in competition.
Yeah, good stuff. And as you all know, when the bands come back, right, they don't just come back for one encore, they come back for two. So I'm giving you guys one more, a quick one here. TJ Dillashaw recently told ESPN he's got it in him to continue competing. He doesn't want to go out like that. But does he still have what it takes to win the title? We'll go in reverse. This time, Fada, it's on you.
Too many injuries. That's my only issue. I mean, he's been plagued with injuries as of late. His knee, his shoulders, the time off. He's no spring chicken as well. And I think when you've got a lot of young contenders, even he beat Sandhagen, but he took a lot of damage in that fight as well. So I don't know. And I don't know. I know he came in with an injury against Sterling, but it was domination by Aljamain Sterling. It's not like you could easily jump in the conversation and put him back. And he doesn't have necessarily the name value of a Conor McGregor where you can just throw him right back in a title fight. I think right now, the fashion in which he lost to Aljamain Sterling and the fact that he's going to probably be out for another year. How old is he going to be when he comes back? 30. I respect his competitiveness because I know TJ's like a psycho competitor and he wants to fight and he doesn't want to go out like that. But I think now we're looking at legacy fights for TJ Dillashaw. I don't think he's in the title conversation, in my opinion, anymore. Give him a Dominic Cruz. That loss hurt him so much. Both guys at this point in their career, I think that's a fight that you'll get a lot of people to watch. He'll make good money, but I don't know if I'm going to put him in the title conversation right now.
Danny, how about you, man?
Yeah, I think his body just seems way too broken in order to hang with the top guys. I mean, you're talking about 2 shoulder surgeries. He had injured his knee, which he required a surgery for when he fought Sandhagen. And he said it, like his shoulder was popping, I think, like 18 times during the training camp, and he still took the fight. Dude, those shoulders injuries are brutal. I had a training partner in jiu-jitsu that had a shoulder injury, and those things are just recurring, and the science is just not advanced enough to fully heal and repair a shoulder for the most part. Those injuries linger, and he's 37, I believe. By the time he comes back, he's probably going to be like, 38 maybe? So I don't know, man. I really think it's going to be an uphill battle. I do think he's got a big name, obviously, in the division. If he does get the wins and he's still in the rankings, it's obviously going to get him closer. But I'd be surprised if we see him in another title fight. But I'll say this. If there's anyone we can't rule out from injury and all that, it's going to have to be TJ Dillashaw, right? Because as far as mentioned, he's a psycho competitor and he's going to figure out a way. So, again, I see it very unlikely, but who knows?
All right, guys, you got to make it quick. Share your thoughts on TJ Dillashaw. Can he ever wear gold again?
I don't think so. All of the reasons that these guys put up, the body's not going to hold up more than likely. But how about this, guys? Like, is the UFC even going to want to put him in that position after what he just did, after what he's done in his past? Are fans going to want to pay for that fight? Are they going to be motivated? I don't think so, guys. So I think he's got a big uphill battle that I don't think he can win.
Yeah. All right. Great stuff from the panel. Thank you, Fada Hanoun. Danny Segura goes from MMA Junkie Radio. And, of course, Cold Coffee producing behind the scenes, making us look good, better than we should. And also shout out to Kamikaze for that excellent cover. Folks, you should tune in every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific to Spinning Back Clique, where we cover all the biggest stories here in MMA. We'll see you all in a week. Keep it locked on MMA Junkie throughout the week. We got the best coverage in all of mixed martial arts. Go out and be a champion.